Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video. Welcome back to the channel. Today I am really excited because we have a brand new episode of the Overrated series where I take your favorite artist, song, or album and ask the question, are they overrated? Today's episode is a really interesting one because we're talking about one of the most popular artists from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, Frank Sinatra. Ranked among the greatest male vocalists ever, one of the top selling artists, selling over 150 million albums, Frank Sinatra was the representation of peak popularity in those early 40s and 50s years. But with that popularity comes the questioning of the credibility of the artist, and you get to ask the question, is Frank Sinatra overrated? Now, even though in recent times it seems like a less and less reliable source, I still turn to social media to actually, research the public's opinion on Frank Sinatra because, as I say all the time in this type of videos, if you want to see if an artist is overrated, you have to see what people, say about this artist. And when it comes to Sinatra, there's a lot of people who believe that he was pretty overrated, saying that his vocal range wasn't all that impressive, his tone of voice was kind of annoying, that he never really wrote anything, it was just taking songs that or other people wrote for him, or taking songs that were already hits and putting them in the albums, and also saying that his discography is really underwhelming, having only a good few records, and that his influence isn't really all that great. People like the Beatles, the Beach Boys, the Rolling Stones, and all these different bands from the 60s were way more influential than him. Now, you could say, for the sake of debate, that some of these things were true. One of the most obvious ones is the songwriting thing. Frank Sinatra didn't really write any of the music he performed. Actually, if you look at his, his most popular albums and his most critically acclaimed ones, that would be the Capitol years, Nelson Riddle was the songwriter, the main songwriter for every single one of these tracks. Frank Sinatra just performed them. So one could argue that he doesn't deserve the same praise as an artist who actually writes their music. However, I think context is needed, and the fact is that we're talking about the 50s and 40s, and songwriting was not really a requirement. A song on the radio was not a way for you to promote your album or promote your image. A song on the radio was a way for you to introduce yourself to the public. You had no internet, you had no social media, so the only way for people to actually know who you are was through the music. And you obviously, if you're going to do that, you don't want to sing an original song that nobody really knows of. Actually, I would argue that it's only, it only shows that he was really someone special because everyone was doing the same thing, but he was the one who stand out to the public. Now, this was not only because of his performance style, it was also in the albums he was packed in, which leads me to my next point, and it's the fact that a lot of people seem to believe that Frank Sinatra doesn't have a single good album in his discography because, again, albums were way different back in the day. People need context to understand why Frank Sinatra released music the way he did. Albums were a way for you to sell your shows, for you to sell a bunch of hits on the radio, and for that to happen, you need to have a collection of hits instead of an actual album with a cohesive narrative or at least a certain mood set for the album. That led to a lot of the albums from back in the day feel more like a compilation record of today instead of an actual cohesive album. Actually, Frank Sinatra was the first one, or one of the first ones, especially when it comes to jazz music, to offer a cohesive experience with a certain mood and a certain narrative in an album called In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning, released in 1955. This is also one of the greatest albums of all time and my personal favorite from Frank Sinatra. The feeling that he puts into every single one of his performances, the string arrangements, the whole mood of the album being so depressing but also beautiful. But he didn't really stop there because he went on to release songs for the Swingin' Lovers, Come Fly With Me. You have the Bossa Nova album from 1967, which I don't really remember the name because it's a Brazilian name and I can't really grasp it, but this one right here, one of my favorite albums from him. There's a bunch of live albums, a bunch of compilation from the Capitol years. I mean, there's just a bunch of music out there when it comes to Frank Sinatra, so obviously there's a lot of people who haven't even heard this Capitol records that in my opinion are his best and some of the greatest of all time too. So I believe that this whole thing with Frank Sinatra not having any good albums is also false. Now there's the thing with influence. There's a lot of people who believe that Frank Sinatra didn't really have that much influence in the music industry. It didn't have a big impact, or not as big as the one that artists like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, or Elvis Presley, for example, if you want to look at a contemporary of Frank Sinatra, had. But this is also a lie. I have a whole video explaining how Frank Sinatra basically created or popularized the modern album. That already shows the level of influence that he had on music at the time. Records that focus more on a certain mood rather than just putting a bunch of hits together, and this basically led to the music revolution that happened in the 60s. Maybe it wasn't a direct influence, especially in terms of style, to some of the greatest albums of the 60s, but this idea of creating an album from something else and just putting a bunch of singles out there came from Frank Sinatra's In the Wee Small Hours in the Morning. That leads me to the last point I want to make on this video, and I left it for last because I think it's the most important one, and that is his performance. There's a lot of people, and believe me, a huge amount of people that are saying that Frank Sinatra wasn't really all that great when it comes to singing, when it comes to his vocal skills, because they are used to the 70s and the 60s and all these flashy singers that were singing some really high notes and were singing all these accelerating songs. So when they look at someone like Frank Sinatra, obviously they're not going to find the same vocal range as you see in those 70s and 80s and, you know, basically the entire rock scene. But again, I think that the main reason why so many people are saying that Frank Sinatra is overrated is because they fail to realize the times. They fail to understand that Frank Sinatra is an artist from the 40s and the 50s, not from the 60s and the 70s. And when it comes to those years, his style of performing was the norm. That's what, you know, that's what you were supposed to do. The songs, the jazz music doesn't really allow you to go that high. You're supposed to just swing with the song. You're supposed to dance over the song. When people say he was an incredible performer, it was because he was singing songs that everyone else was singing at the time. For each one of Frank Sinatra's songs, you have probably a dozen other artists singing the same song at the same exact time, playing on the exact same station on the radio. But Frank Sinatra was the one that stand out. And that, that doesn't just happen out of coincidence. It's not a lucky shot. You know, it's basically because of his ability to put his charisma, his personality, and his swing overall into his voice. The way that he modified the song, he usually picked up the pace a little bit, making them a bit faster than the rest of the interpretations at the time. Such control over his own voice that even though the track was incredibly mediocre, because yes, a lot of these jazz standards are just boring, he managed to keep the song interesting. Many of the songs that you see in albums like Swing Easy, for example, doesn't sound half as good when other artists perform it. You know, tracks like That's Life, tracks like My Way, so many other artists have tried to perform those tracks, but they never succeeded at beating Frank Sinatra's interpretation. And while maybe you can't really grasp the reason why, because he's not going that high, the notes are not that high, he's not as loud as you expect him to be. So why is it that we believe the performance to be so good? I have no idea. Personally, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but it's great. You feel the greatness in the music, and that's all I need for me to say that he was an amazing artist. You don't really need to explain anything when it comes to music. You just have to enjoy it. If you enjoy it, that's all you need. You can try to explain why you like the music. That's pretty much the whole reason why I started this channel. All I know is that when Sinatra performs a song, he owns the song, his interpretation becomes a canon interpretation of the song, and you can't really credit all that to luck. So overall, no, I don't think Sinatra is overrated. I do agree that his songwriting skills were zero. That's the only thing I can agree with. But when it comes to the albums, he has more than a few incredible records, especially if you go to his Capitol years. In terms of performance, he was one of the best performers of all time. Maybe not the best vocalist of all time, but definitely one of the best performers. And also, when it comes to influence, he changed the way people perform music in the 40s and the 50s. And also, he created or popularized what would eventually be called the modern album, or, the modern idea we have of an album. For those reasons, my conclusion is that Frank Sinatra is not overrated at all. That'll be it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. Now, this is only my opinion, okay? My thoughts on all these different comments I found on social media. So if you disagree with me, and I'm pretty sure some people will, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments so we can all have a small discussion in the comment section and have some fun over there. That's pretty much the reason why I started this channel. So with that being said, once again, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.